This one ability just made Dandadan's perfect power system even better. Not only did Spiral place the power system on par with series like JoJo and Gurren Lagann, but it actually just revealed how Dandadan is going to end. That's why in this video, I'm gonna talk about why Dandadan's new Spiral power drastically improved Dandadan, discuss exactly why Spiral powers like the ones from JoJo and Gurren Lagann are so broken, and explain how this new power tells us how to defeat Dandadan's biggest villain. Just be warned that there's going to be some major spoilers. Now, I already know what you're thinking. The power system in Dandadan is just fine, and it never needed to be fixed. I mean, I did upload a video talking about how Dandadan has one of the better power systems in anime, so why would it need to be fixed? I did say that, but that doesn't cover one of Dandadan's flaws. Dandadan has a fun power system because it's very loose and doesn't fixate on hard rules. But that also means that Tatsu kinda makes up the abilities on the fly, and there's nothing that balances them out. In other words, every fight is decided case by case, and there's no interactions or friction between the different abilities. This was actually something that happened in early One Piece. You had the different categories of Devil Fruit users: Zoan, Paramecia, and then Logia. Devil Fruit users almost always outclassed regular people. Zoans were strong, but they all did the same thing, basically. In contrast, Paramecia users had wildly different abilities, and Logia users dominated everyone. That is until Hockey was introduced. Suddenly, the different Devil Fruit users could balance each other out, they could enhance the abilities they already had, and even normal humans could outclass Devil Fruit users. But for the longest time, Dandadan never had a Hockey. It never had something that gave all of the characters a fighting chance. For most of the story, the winner of a fight was kind of decided by whoever Tatsu wanted to win. Which is like, well, duh, he's the writer. But think about the anime with the best power systems. Even though the fights turn out exactly how the writers planned them, those fights have to follow all of the rules of the power system. Otherwise, it's inconsistent. But in Dandadan, you didn't really have that problem. Spirit mediums and yokai users were sort of on the same tier, but there wasn't any rock, paper, scissors going on. Whoever won a given fight always won the fight purely because that's just what the narrative dictated. On the one hand, it's fun because it keeps things surprising, but on the other hand, it holds this power system back because it has all of these really cool abilities and nothing to upgrade them or tie them together. But that all changed with the introduction of Spiral. In chapter 94, Turbo Granny explains that all creations on this world are created from spirals, including our very DNA. At the time, all this did was help Okaroon traverse power lines in ghost form, so it seemed like a random lore drop for the next 100 chapters. But that changed in chapter 205 when we learned that Seiko taught Gigi how to use the power of Spiral. Specifically, rotating his energy beam in a certain direction allows him to damage even an ethereal enemy like his opponent, the Red Baron. And this completely changes Dandadan in two ways. First of all, this means now anyone has the potential to fight ghosts. We kind of knew this before since we've always been fighting yokai, but those were yokai, so like monsters. We've never been fighting ghosts. You know, like ghosts like the Red Baron. Basically, he's like Smoke from Mortal Kombat, so every time you attack, it just passes right through him. But now we know that's not going to be a problem if we face similar opponents in the future, which is a big deal considering the army of yokai we've been facing because of the main villain, but I'll say more on that towards the end of the video. The other change is now every character has the potential to power up all of their abilities. This is something that every battle shonen does in one way or another, and there's a reason some of the best anime do this with the concept of Spiral. Gurren Lagann might not have invented the idea, but it's the first one everyone thinks of just because of how much it affected the characters and the story. Simon's powers are all drill-based, and the final villains are literally anti-Spiral. Funny enough, Dandadan's use of Spiral is pretty close to Gurren Lagann's. Gurren Lagann uses this pseudo-scientific explanation of how DNA is a spiral, so it powers all life force in the universe. That's why the Beastmen couldn't use Spiral, because they were artificial life forms that couldn't reproduce or evolve. But those who could use Spiral were able to enhance their powers to levels they normally couldn't achieve. This is more or less the explanation of Spiral we get from Turbo Granny, so it's not wild to say Tatsu was probably inspired by Gurren Lagann when he decided to add this to Dandadan. That being said, there's another version of Spiral powers that's just as popular and even more promising. In JoJo, we get two versions of this. First, there was Hammond, which was all about ripples and breathing. But in Steel Ball Run, we get the Spin. The Spin is derived from the real-world Golden Spiral, a rotation created by the use of the Golden Ratio. Using this ratio not only creates a mathematically infinite spiral, but also allows users to harness these spirals as an infinite power source. By doing so, they can do things such as power projectiles, and they can even harness the kinetic energy of a horse. And without getting into spoilers, the best users can basically surpass the laws of physics by using the power of infinity. The reason I bring this up is because with Dandadan leaning more into Spiral, this opens up the story to possibilities like we can see in Gurren Lagann and JoJo. Granted, the science of these abilities isn't so important as much as the basic ideas, namely using the power of DNA and life force, and using the power of infinity. We've already seen this kind of application with Gigi when Seiko explained that different rotations have different kinds of power, something that really didn't even get covered in the other two series. If Tatsu really leans into this, then we can expect power-up versions of abilities we've already seen, kinda like how Gigi used Spiral to power up his energy attack. On top of that, now we know that we can use the direction of rotation to attack different kinds of enemies, meaning we can expect different variations of the same attacks. And an especially important application of this would be in the case of Okarun, who lost basically all of his powers. So he just got that new Ogre Bat. We don't know what it does yet, but we can guess it gives him superhuman strength and transforms into a club or something. In addition to whatever its usual abilities are, Okarun could also use the power of Spiral to power up his swings, and even put certain kinds of spins into his swings whenever he's fighting enemies like the Red Baron. Because Spiral is a thing now, this means that even characters like Okarun with no powers are just as capable of fighting even the strongest enemies. This means we could even get characters like Kinta literally turning into a Gurren Lagann character since he uses nanobots. So he could make a giant mech and build a drill that lets him use the power of Spiral. He was the MVP of the Space Globalists arc, so why wouldn't he do something like that in future arcs? Speaking of which, now that we've talked about the potential of Dandadan's characters, we need to talk about how this reveals the end of Dandadan, because there's a good chance that we just found out that Spiral is the key to beating Count Saint Germain, the character who seems to be the final boss of Dandadan. For a while, it's been teased that Count Saint Germain has seemingly limitless abilities. We don't know where he came from, but we know that thanks to his sword and small knives, he can steal and collect abilities. This means that he's almost like All for One, since he can use whatever ability he collected. And as we're finding out, he also has his own personal organization of yokai users and aliens, so he also has access to all of their abilities as well. The reason this is a big threat is because characters like the Red Baron have made it very clear that these enemies are going to get stronger and the characters are going to need new ways to fight them. And what better way to fight the army of infinite abilities than with the power of infinity itself? Basically, Gigi's recent fight has made it clear that Okarun and the other characters need to start using Spiral against Count Saint Germain and his allies. Spirals were a major theme in the fight against the Cyclone, and obviously they were a big theme with Red Baron. So this is going to become more important as Okarun's team fights more enemies. But the real question is, how will this play out against Count Saint Germain himself? For starters, Okarun and the other characters need Spiral to fight against whatever abilities he's collected. But we also have to remember that Count Saint Germain's goal is the Dandadan, the actual Dandadan that he mentioned in the Danmara arc. We have no idea what that is yet, but we can expect that it's even more powerful than his current ability to steal powers. This would place Count Saint Germain on a level unreachable by any of the characters in the story. He would be virtually unstoppable. If it's some kind of immortality, then he can't be killed. In fact, the image we see when he mentions the Dandadan seems to be a reference to the womb realm in Buddhism, so it's not unreasonable to expect Count Saint Germain to be seeking some kind of godhood, especially when he's apparently been alive for hundreds of years. Interestingly enough, it's worth noting that this image has a lot of mandalas, and there's two things about this that hint at Spiral being the key to stopping Count Saint Germain. First of all, mandalas are just geometric shapes, and as we mentioned with the golden ratio, geometry is a big part of spirals. Second, the mandalas are arranged in circles, so if mandalas really are the key to this power, then the geometry of spirals could be the key to countering the Dandadan. All of this is to say, even though we don't know what the Dandadan is, or how Count Saint Germain intends to use it, spirals will definitely play some part in stopping them. To do that, Okarun and the other characters can use the spiral to get stronger and upgrade the abilities they already have to fight against any potential enemy. And that is why spirals just made Dandadan's power system infinitely better.